I'm joined today by Father Richard Leonard, which I'm really excited about. You can see there's only one guest today because we just want to talk to Richard because he has an immense knowledge on this topic. So we're talking about using film as a mode of, investigating, talking about, and learning about our faith in the classroom. Richard is currently the parish priest in Sydney, but he's also been the head of the Catholic Film Office. I think currently is the head of the Catholic Film Office, and he's also our big boss here at Jesuit Communications. So it's always a pleasure when we get to speak to him. Richard, thank you so very much for coming and joining us today. We have had you briefly before with other guests, but I think this is a topic that we're always looking for a bit of material because visual material used well is so engaging in the classroom as a mode of learning. Just to start off, I'm going to ask you a little bit about yourself. So you've had quite a fascinating journey coming to faith and film. When I say fascinating, I'm actually just jealous of some of the opportunities you've had, and I wish it was me. But how did your background lead you to work in the Australian Catholic Film Office?
Well, it's a long story, but firstly, thanks very much for inviting me. And maybe I'm a solo today because I am the big boss. I don't know. But I'm delighted to be here and I'm delighted to see some very familiar names, if not some faces too. But it's great to see people that I know I've been with before in other in-service situations. I got into film because the bottom line is because the Jesuit provincial told me to. So it was part of my vow of obedience. When I got ordained a priest, some of you might know if you've heard me speak before, I tell some stories about King's Cross. I was the assistant priest, a deacon, and then assistant priest at King's Cross. And then I got a visit from my provincial who said, who was relatively new. I think he'd only been in office about 18 months of 6-year term. And he said, look, I noticed in the file that you are meant to go and do a doctorate in theology at Oxford. And he said, look, that's great. I went for doctoral studies at Oxford. I loved it, and I'm sure you will too. But I wonder what we do with all those creative gifts that you have. So I didn't have a background in media or film. I didn't make 16 millimeter films as a kid or anything like that. But I was a debater. I was a public speaker. I was a singer, a musician, and had been in theatre. And he said, I just wonder what we do with all those gifts. I think you'll find academic theology fairly boring. And so he said, every time I think about you, I think about communications and media. And I think the church has been lamentable, in Australia anyway, in our relationship to the media. So I'm wondering whether we shouldn't get more serious about it. And there are three of you, three of my generation of Jesuits. I won't say their names because neither of them are Jesuits or priests anymore, but one of them to go into print, one into television. And he said, what about going into cinema? And so I was apprenticed after King's Cross, to work in Albert Street Productions, which was jointly owned by the Archdiocese of Melbourne and the Jesuits at that time. And then I did 2 years there. And then I got sent to the London Film School at Covent Garden and did the Master in Fine Arts there in film and television production. And then when I came home, there was a big project that I thought I was going into, and while I was away, just before I got back, actually, it fell over and died. So then a new provincial, a new boss, sent me off to do a doctorate in film. So I ended up with starting at the University of Melbourne with Professor Barbara Creed, and ended up finishing it off at UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles. And I did my PhD on Peter Weir, the Australian director, and looked at the idea of mysticism in film, and particularly in his films. Then, when I came back from my doctoral studies at exactly that time, a very famous priest in this area, Peter Malone, a missionary of the Sacred Heart, an MSc, he had been elected the international president of the Catholic media organisation called Cygnus, and he was moving to London. And so he nominated me, or suggested to me, to become the director of the Australian Catholic Office for Film and Broadcasting. And I did that for 22 years, and lots of other things, but I did that. And then a couple of years ago, the bishops hit a bit of a financial crunch, and they had about 30 agencies and they reduced them to 16. And guess which one didn't survive? The Office for Film and Broadcasting was one of the casualties of that. And so that's how I came to be in this space. And then really I've started writing about films, values, education, and I've done an awful lot of teacher in services, not just in this space, but in a lot of other areas that I've studied and tried to become a little bit more articulate about over the time.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It's it is a changing landscape in media at the moment, isn't it? We're all sort of trying to adjust. I know you've been doing some new stuff with your homilies in the Sydney parish as well, um, and that's quite exciting to hear about. Um,
I'll just touch on that because it may be helpful to some of our participants, not necessarily in the area of film, and although I do quote films a fair bit. Um, but we did a big survey of this parish last year, and so this parish is Kirribilli, Lavender Bay, and North Sydney. There are three churches, one parish, and the Jesuits have been here for 148 years. I like saying I'm the parish priest of Luna Park, which sort of situates it for people who may not live in Sydney. And it's a very affluent area. It's also an exceedingly generous community to all the different projects that we have. But in this survey, what a surprise, the number one thing that came back was trying to attract and keep young adults and talking to them especially. So it was the young adult group that came to me and said, young adults need to know two things about coming to Mass on Sunday, if that's where we want them to be. They need to know that it's going to be engaging, they're not going to be bored, and they need to know that they're going to get a message worth listening to. And I was incredibly, well, not surprised, but they were very strong about it. So in the end, they said, why don't we start taping some of your homilies and set up a parish youth YouTube channel, which is exactly what we've done. And it wasn't my idea, but it's been a bit of a hit and it's got a life and currency. Can't say we've got a stack of 22-year-olds walking through the door just yet, but it's creating its own energy. And so that message is a reflection on the gospel of every single Sunday at this stage.
Yeah, no, I like that idea. I've gotten off topic. I'll come back to topic, but
Mm.
I often push the idea of, music ministry. Michelle and I have both written articles about that sort of thing and getting young people from the school across. But I think there's definitely, your production students and your film students could definitely be doing some sort of either volunteering or assessment in the church space, just as long as they understand the rules of filming in public and filming at church and that sort of thing. But yeah, definitely a good
Okay,
idea.
back on topic, I think, Laura.
Back on topic.
Both
Sorry.
of us.
Yeah. You got me on a passion topic. So let's just go wind back. But what do you feel that films offer RE classes? Is it a case of what you watch, or is it a case of how you watch a film?
It's both. And look, there's a really simple pedagogical, as someone with a teaching background, taught RE for several years in our own schools, Jesuit schools. It's just a no-brainer, isn't it? Because kids are visual learners, whether we like it or not. They don't aggregate their basic aggregation of information these days comes from the visual, not from the printed form. Now, I'm an old English teacher. I love texts. Well, these are visual texts. And I think we've moved on past thinking if a class is sitting there watching a film or part of a film or a television program, then we're just babysitting them. I think there was an old theory from that was an old attitude that was the case. Now we know they're visual learners. The other thing it does, of course, is it touches the affective. It touches your emotional life. And I don't think we're to run away from that, especially in RE. How we feel about things is important. Now, it is also true that I'm, as a Jesuit and certain many teachers, we like ideas, like what you think really matters too. So it's not just how I feel, but in RE it can be a bit sterile. And I want to recognise really early on in this discussion that the kids we're teaching now are unchurched. We'd love it to be otherwise. We'd love them all going to Mass, and that's not everybody. We've got a lot of very wonderful, active Catholic families and kids in our parishes, which is great. But the vast majority, at least in my experience, the vast majority of kids coming to our schools are not there on Sunday. So their experience of church, their experience is our school, and their experience of learning about the faith is our classroom. That's it, and it may be it for life. So we've all got to firstly recognise the pedagogical reality of how kids learn now. Then we've also got to recognise that actually you've got to think carefully, but you've got to feel too. And the affect is an incredibly important part of religious experience and also of a sense of belonging to a group that I get a sense of what they feel and why they feel this. And then the final thing too is if it was good enough for Jesus to use parables and stories, why isn't it good enough for us? So we still know that one of the great teaching vehicles is to tell a story. And, even in science, not that I've ever taught science, and God knows I shouldn't, but if you wanted to communicate how this theory came about, tell the story of it. Look at Oppenheimer, for goodness sake. Like people went and watched a 3.5 hour film, or 3 hours and 18 minutes, or whatever it was, because they were getting a story about an incredible piece of science. And the parable matters. So it's parabolic. And that's why I think in RE it's absolutely essential these days.
Absolutely. I mean, there's two things that jumped out to me there where you were talking about the affective. That came out in our last professional learning session as well, in that the difference between the RE classroom is that idea of we're not telling people what to think or what, they're working in their own space and we're
Mhm.
accompanying them in their own space. So um,
Having said that, Laura, I'm happy to guide them. Like I'm not one of those people who think every choice is a good choice, or I'm not a moral relativist. I think there are some terrible films that give very bad messages, and so we've got to develop critical consumption. And so even in RE, I think we can help do that. We can train people's eye. We can so they get a sense of what's being communicated and why, and get them to reflect on. What does that more deeply say about the human condition? And what does it say, helpfully or unhelpfully, about something more transcendent, metaphysical, something more and greater, something about God?
I love that term, helpfully or unhelpfully. That's really good. And I love that idea of story as well. I'll be stealing that. Very nice, very nice idea, to be comfortable with because it's not a waste of time and people enjoy a good story. Um, you touched briefly about unhelpfully or helpfully, and sometimes films do have darker themes um, um, for a good message or a bad message. How can RE teachers help students engage with films that explore violence or brokenness without glamorizing that sort of message?
Sure. I think well, let me go back a step. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Theologica, Book 2, Part 2, Section 3, to be precise, talks about the virtues in the Christian life: justice, fidelity, self-care, prudence, mercy, and hospitality. So the four virtues, the two values. And they're fantastic. So any film, any television program, any podcast, any internet site that talks about justice, fidelity, self-care, prudence, mercy, or hospitality, give it a big tick. It's singing our song. It doesn't have to mention the Blessed Virgin Mary. It doesn't have to mention God. It doesn't have to talk about the Pope and the Church. If it's talking about those things, then whether it knows it or not, it's talking our language. And so I think we should have runs on the board of praising what we can. Sometimes teachers, adults, and parents can get quickly boxed into what they don't like, and they're only heard about what they don't like. And like it's all bad, and they can talk in generalities, which is not very helpful. Like there's nothing good on the internet. It's just preposterous, but we all get caught into it at some stage. Then there's the seven deadly sins, which Thomas also talks about in the Summa Theologica: pride, greed, envy, anger, lust, gluttony, and sloth. I want to bring back the word sloth. Isn't that a wonderful word? It's onomatopoeic. It's exactly the way you would expect it to sound. Sloth. So the thing about those is that you've also got to reflect on those. So what the world would be like given over to those. So, and they're the compromises we make in our own humanity. Now, the problem for a lot of media right across the generations, this is not new, is that where is the edgy stuff? It's not looking at the virtues and the values. It's looking at the seven deadly sins and looking at them when they're out of control. So rather than dismiss them, we can appropriate them into our context for a start and say, it's okay to look at the dark side. We've just got to ask two more questions that I think are important. Does this piece of media, in whatever form it is, but film we're talking about particularly today, does this film normalize this behavior? So we shouldn't forgive anybody. We should just be revengeful. Think of how many films we've got and television programs that are about getting revenge. And then we wonder why we've got a problem online in bullying in schools and in the playground where we're getting people, getting back at them. We're not forgiving anybody. We're getting even. And the world is doing that. So we've got to ask whether it's normalized because it's not normal. The seven deadly sins, pride, greed, envy, anger, lust, gluttony, and sloth, are a corruption of who we are meant and called to be. Secondly, and you mentioned this word, and I've used it in my writings before, is it glamorized? So not only does some of the media presentations of the seven deadly sins normalize it, it then says it's the way to live. Like be greedy as you can, be envious of other people, be lustful. And lust here means not a healthy sexuality, but just a voracious sexuality, which doesn't attend to the relationship within which a healthy sexuality can flourish. So we've got to be careful about and critical of. Like I'd stand over and against any media that normalizes and glamorizes the seven deadly sins or normalizes and glamorizes evil that tries to says, look, it's of no consequence. Because while an individual film and an individual television program, they may not have a big influence on anybody or everybody, it's the leaven in the bread in a negative way. It starts to change the conversation and starts to say what's acceptable and what's not. It starts to talk about that a lack of forgiveness, that treating the outsider cruelly is to be acceptable. And so I think we need to just be alert to that. And as I said, if anybody here knows opera, they like the seven deadly sins. They'll have five of them by interval. So the idea that this is new because it's visual and big and obviously impinges very strongly on our imagination. Well, it's not. Stories, novels, plays, Shakespeare, Chaucer, all of them did this as well. It's all in there. The Canterbury Tales is full of Chaucer. Is absolutely replete with endless stories of the seven deadly sins. But normally there's a moral that exposes that they're not glamorous and they're not life-giving, and that can be a bit different now. I think also, as I said before, we've got to get all of us, adults and students together, to become better consumers. And so I like John Pungenti. He's a Canadian Jesuit who worked in media education. He's dead now, but John came up with a really helpful four-word slogan for consumption of media, which I find helpful. Event, attitude, behavior, values. Event, what did I watch and why did I watch it? So we get good on blaming the media for what it brings to us. We've got to get better on saying, what are we taking to it? So if you take boredom to the television, you become a channel surfer. If you take arousal to the internet, you'll probably go to a porn site. If you take loneliness to the multiplex, you go to the next film that's on because you just want some company. And, that's an acceptable way to have some company on your own. So event, what it brings to me, what I take to it. Attitude, what's in it and what's not there. The mind the gap in cultural studies. If people have done that at uni, that's a big slogan there. Mind the gap. Where's the gap? Whose story isn't here? And in Michelle's Welcome to Country today, that's a classic moment. Whose story isn't part of our national story? It has been until quite recently the Indigenous story, clearly. And it's very difficult to tell that story properly and well. Behavior, what's it trying to get me to do? And even if that's a change of thinking, but it could be to buy something or want something or desire something. So what's it trying to get me to do? Behavior and values. How do they line up with Christian values, which easy to find where they are? Galatians 5:22, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, fidelity, and self-control. What's it saying to those collection of values? And so I find EABV a very helpful, quick thing to have in the classroom when we're trying to analyze this stuff. I promise that not all my answers will be this long, but
I'll tell you what, that was gold. I've started talking about this nuggets of gold thing that I picked up from another conference that I went to. But I'm always hoping I can offer people one, maybe two. I had three in just that answer. If I was writing a unit, I'd be making those connections between, Thomas Aquinas and that sort of thing. There's an analytical framework you can apply to, film. But then that little formula at the end is absolute gold too, if you
yeah.
want to apply it as an
Well,
analytical
the thing I
framework.
love about our Catholic
Mm.
tradition is when you know it, it can be so helpful. The problem is we don't know it, or we don't know it as well as we could or should, and it's often presented as restricting us. But in fact, if you know Thomas and what a breadth of imagination he had, then all of a sudden it can set you free. It can give you a really different hook or system to think about and to
Yeah.
progress.
And I think one of the things we look for at work, sorry for making comment, Richard, but is that how do we make this seem relevant to young people's lives and things like
Yeah.
that? Richard's just given you the bridge then to apply that to Bluey, or in the primary school
Yeah.
classroom, or apply that to even a superhero film if you can find one that's
Um,
rated enough to use in, rated appropriately to use in the older with the older kids.
Well,
All of a
and
sudden,
actually, the
yeah,
superhero genre is a great one to think about because it's well, it has been the Marvel comic genre has been the number one box office smash now for about 15 years, and I wrote a chapter of one of my books. I think it was in What Does It All Mean? Is Jesus just another superhero? And where I try and analyze how we can take the superhero genre and use it in, well, and compare and contrast when we talk about Jesus to kids. And I just think it's really quick, really creative in getting them to think about critically about the superhero genre. Like I'm really critical of it because it's utterly passive. You just wait for the superhero to come and save the day, and you don't do anything. He or she does it for you. I think that's hopeless. Whereas what Jesus does is empower us to change the world, that we go and actually live the Lord's Prayer. That's a very different superhero going on there.
and no enemies because God loves everyone.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. How do you fit that into superhero land? Um, so actually, that's led really well into the next question I wanted to ask you, Richard, about how can RE educators teach young people to critique film thoughtfully? I know we've touched on this, rather than condemn it outright. I struggle with this sometimes. Oh, is that good enough for my children to watch? Or,
Mm.
is that suitable for the classroom? How is
Yeah.
anything suitable?
Yeah, I want to encourage everybody to do one thing. Can we stop saying don't judge? I think we've been conned here. There can be a thing around that we shouldn't say we shouldn't judge anybody, we can't judge them, we shouldn't judge this. We're in no position to judge. Now, I think what we're trying to say when we say that sort of thing is don't condemn. But there's a world of difference between judgment and condemnation. I'm in no position to condemn anybody. That's up to God alone, who knows all, sees all, loves all, is compassionate to all. But judge I must. Last I checked, it's one of the seven gifts of the Holy Spirit. So it's an interesting gift to get, and then we're never meant to exercise it. So it's right judgment. So I think that's okay. Now it's not all that helpful that at one stage in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus says, "Judge not, yet you will be judged." And he does use the word judge. But then Jesus judged people all the time, all the time. So when people say, "Oh, you're a Christian, you shouldn't be judging people," well, Jesus did. And I'll give you one example. John chapter 8, the woman taken in adultery. And then, he does the famous little doodle on the ground, which we've always said is, where's the bloke, is what he's writing into the dirt, because often it takes two to tango. So where's he? But then he says, "Where are those who condemn you? Neither do I. Go and sin no more." Now, go and sin no more, that's a lot of judgment in that little phrase. So when people say, "Oh, Jesus didn't judge anybody," that's just not true. He does. But he compassionately judges people. And he also but doesn't condemn, and nor should we. So I think our judgment should be like Jesus: compassionate judgment, informed judgment, and critical consumption. So I think it's perfectly okay. Like, it's not okay if people are sexist, homophobic, racist. That's not okay. We don't condemn the person because they're better than that. But what they're saying right now, what they're doing right now, is not acceptable. And when we see that on the silver screen or on Married at First Sight, that doesn't make it better or good. That just makes it normal and or normalizes it in one way or form or another. So I think we've got to be better at being critical consumers and compassionate judges.
I can see how you could conclude an assignment with that sort of a statement as well. When you're trying to guide students, into critiquing something using one of the frameworks that you mentioned earlier, that could be really good in an assignment guide. Just thinking there. So let's talk about our own stories in the classroom, because that was one thing that stuck out to me when I was speaking to you earlier. How important story is in our culture. And so why is it important for RE students to see their own life stories as valuable? And how might that change the way they watch and respond to movies?
Yeah. Well, at its best, I think what all media does, but film today, is it illuminates something in our own story. And I'll give you an example. When I was studying in London, Diana, Princess of Wales, died. And it was an absolute shock to Britain to see the outpouring of grief that happened, the Queen of our hearts. And here were these terribly restrained, normally, like stereotypical and a cruel one, but emotionally constipated Brits, all crying in the street and throwing flowers. And I went around to Kensington Palace and Buckingham Palace and St James Palace and saw these mountains of flowers. And no one could believe what was going on. And, they talked about it in terms of hysteria. But actually, whatever happened, like the death of a 36-year-old mother of two, is always a tragic event. So, but whatever happened in that week or weeks triggered a grief in to express it. They could now express something. And that's as much coming out of our own story. Like when I am deeply moved by a story at the cinema, it is the story on the screen, first and foremost. But it's also the trigger that that's doing for me, my grief, my sense of loneliness, isolation, my experience of feeling hated or whatever it might be, or an injustice, my sense of what's not right. Um, so that's where it triggers things in our own story, and that can be helpful or unhelpful. Where I think this matters is that when we value our own story, then all these other stories bounce off it appropriately. They can engage me, educate me, infuriate me, broaden my horizons, tell me about people and places I know nothing about, cause me to think about things metaphysical or greater or more that I've never quite contemplated before. And in a very engaging way, they can entertain it and entertain me, and like draw me on. I think the all the things we do in school for self-esteem are all linked in here, because remember Jesus said that there are three elements to his reign in the world. Christ's reign in the world is to love God, love your neighbor as we love ourselves. Now, we've been good on love of God, got to get better. We've been good on love of neighbor, must get better. I reckon we've been a disaster on love of self, at least historically. My schooling, we weren't encouraged to think like if you got above your station or thought more above yourself than you should, then you were put down, not by teachers and kids. So I don't think that's helpful. And thank God we've moved on beyond that. But all the things we do for self-esteem with the kids these days, is actually, I think, absolutely at the heart of the gospel. Because the stronger someone's story is, like even when we get kids to tell their story or their experience, and we demand that people listen respectfully to it, and we defend those boundaries really critically, and so we should. That's really helping even their media consumption. Because if you've got a story which is valuable, or at least it's not overvalued. It's just you hold it because it's important and it's yours. Then I think you can interact with other people's stories. When you don't have a strong story, or when it's one you don't value, or in fact one you negate, then other stories can become your life. In literature these days, they talk about living vicariously through media. Or I'll give you another example. Sporting teams are a classic example that, I know people who seriously live through the ups and downs of Collingwood. Now, God bless them. I'm not putting them down. I'm simply observing that for them, that's so important in their life that that's part of their story. And I know people who the off season, when that's not on, they can get down because they haven't got this engaging, this fuel. But when the season's on, oh, this is utterly passionate. They know everything, and they're living vicariously. Now, I'm all for enjoying sport and enjoying the teams and barracking them away. But my story that I'm living is actually more important than any of that. And this is a factor or a part of it. It's not something, a vehicle through which I live my life through that. And the media can do that. Soap operas and people can sort of live in and through it. Like for instance, I can go to people in my parish who might watch The Bold and the Beautiful, and I hope everybody here has watched The Bold and the Beautiful. It is the worst acting on TV, and I sort of I haven't watched it for a long time myself, but I did for a while. And the thing about The Bold and Beautiful is I've had people talk to me as though those characters are real. They will talk to me about Ridge and Brooke as though they actually live. And that's what we're talking about, this vicarious realization, it's called. So we're realizing a world which the distinction between my story and a fictional story becomes slightly blurred or does become blurred. And I think we've got to work harder on building up our own story, valuing our own story.
Gosh, that's such good.
And then the media and then film and TV can play the role it should play.
Oh, absolutely. I was just thinking about reality TV. I'm the only woman I know who doesn't watch it. So I've got nothing to talk about at dinner parties.
No.
Such a shame. But
I,
also,
I, I watch every single episode of Married at First Night, not because I love the show, I think it's a dreadful show, but I go into an awful lot of schools, and particularly, if I go into a co-ed school or a Catholic girls' school, when it's on, I'll start a homily with, what could anybody believe what Ryan and Tanya did the other night? And from that moment on, I've got the room listening to me because whether we like it or not, and we can poo-poo it and say it's terrible and it's awful, well, it's the number one show after sport in this country for the last 5 years.
yeah,
So, and
absolutely.
who watches it? Adolescents watch it. So if we're
Yeah.
going to be serious about at least knowing what's forming them and then how we might respond to it, I'm not saying we become a slave to Married at First Sight, although I am riveted by it. Like, how dreadful why would people put themselves forward for this? We know what they're going to do to you. We know this is predicated on conflict. And we know that, your dignity is going to be somewhat challenged here, if not really challenged. So, yeah, I'm amazed that people even say yes to going on the damn thing.
Oh no, I'm too empathetic towards it. It's too painful for me to watch. And I also noted, we speak about it lightly, but if you're the kid in the classroom who's not represented often on television, having your own story valued can be important too, can't it? If
Yeah,
you're
well,
using
and
them.
that's why, even having characters of Asian, of African, of Indigenous, clearly our Indigenous stories. If you only see white kids doing, middle class things, well, there's the attitude. What story isn't there? Where's the gap? There's the gap, and I think we have got better at that, though we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, no, it is good. Um, I've got a question here that's in the chat box from Chris Gilmore, and they're asking whether you're seeing students becoming more black and white in their viewing rather than able to see the subtleties that directors and writers are trying to portray.
Hmm. That's an interesting question, isn't it? I haven't noticed it, but then I'm not working as much directly as you guys are now. So I've been out of the classroom for a fair bit. I've worked with teachers, but I haven't been working as much with students. So it could be true. The one thing we're just starting to notice in a few secondary schools is that kids are more open to the discussion about religion in a way that there was a cynicism and a dismissal even maybe a few years ago. And they're now starting to talk about they're more interested and more passionate. So they may be more black and white. I think the world, when you want a black and white world, you want a secure world, a safe world. You want things to be easily resolved. When we've got a nuanced world, And I'm not talking about, literary devices or, artistic, license where they're doing something because they want to be sophisticated. And it is incredibly sophisticated sometimes. I'm talking about where the world itself is just sort of, the dichotomies are very, very clear. It's binary. That's a world that then you can handle. Like that's good and that's evil. And if only the world was that, if only the world was that simple, and it's just not. For instance, they say a Jesuit cannot get through any presentation without mentioning St. Ignatius Loyola. So here we go. St. Ignatius said, because he was big on discernment of making choices in the light of faith, and he said, the hardest choice you will ever make is not between good and evil. They tend to take care of themselves. The hardest decision you will ever make is between what is best, what is better, and what is best. And he said that needs a lifetime of preparation and of negotiation, of trying to deal with it. What's better? What's best? Oh boy, I think that's insightful. And he died in 1560. So 1556, I should say. So I just think, you know, I think sometimes when we want the world to be black and white, it's a bit adolescent for a start. It's good, bad, right, wrong. Everything is sort of, they'd like the world to be more manageable. And that sometimes that would compromise the ability to read the subtleties. Yeah. But maybe because the world, like if I was 15, 16, the world is a pretty insecure place right now. And I grew up in the nuclear thing, the early 70s. And I remember thinking they could blow this bloody place up on us. And I'm sure kids with the environmental issues, with Gaza, Ukraine, world conflicts, that the world feels somewhat precarious. I'm 62 and it can feel precarious.
And we all hear about it now too. When you were talking about that wanting safety, it really made me think of the superhero genre again, but also that notion that some kids get. I don't know if any other teachers have come across this, that um, this kid at school is my enemy, and it's really, really, really definite. It's not just this is a kid who maybe we don't have much in common, but they're actually my enemy. That really sort of black and white thinking, and so I suppose there might be some opportunity for us to sort of talk about that because I don't know. Every time I hear the Easter story, I think about Pontius Pilate in a different way. Like whereas when I was a kid, I definitely thought he was a bad guy.
He was a puppet.
Mm.
But even talking about, the kids in the playground being my enemy, the gangland stuff. How long, like going back to Welcome Back Kotter, some of us are old enough to remember an American sitcom. There have been gangs and groups, and then they were funny once, and then things changed. And all of a sudden, but it goes back to West Side Story too, the Jets, so
I was thinking of that, The Outsiders, yeah.
so, the world is becoming more demarcated and you've got to belong to one group or the other, which is not usually helpful.
That tribalism in politics too. Sorry, I'm not sure if it's Villela. I apologize if I've got your last name incorrect. Um, she was wondering if you could identify the top 5 films you've taught students in RE. She shows Dead Man Walking to Year 11 and Rabbit Proof Fence. Oh, Rabbit Proof Fence. I think I've got trauma from teaching Rabbit Proof Fence because it's such
Yeah,
a
it's great.
terribly,
Wonderful.
oh yeah, and those little
Let me say a word on Rabbit
children.
Proof Prince because it wouldn't be one I would have put in my list, so I will come back to the other five. But Rabbit Proof Prince, I remember watching it. It was a deeply moving story and wonderful. And like it was one thing to know it was based on a true story, and I think it is pretty faithful to the story. By the way, I don't think they've invented much because they didn't have to. But then if you waited until the credits or right at the end, do you remember there's where the women, the actual women who have survived at that point come onto the screen and they're walking. Oh my God, I don't know, I was anybody's. I was wailing, I think. There was something that about seeing those magnificent Indigenous women at the rabbit-proof fence where they were taken from, and so that's very powerful. To answer the question, and these are some sort of films with religious content that I think are really essential. If we can break them up into stuff for class in periods, or if we can reorganize the timetable to watch them en masse. The Mission, I think, is still great, and most kids haven't seen it. Most of the ones films I'm going to tell you right now, you've seen 22 times. If you've done Christian living camps or RE, year 11 RE camps like I've done, oh my God, I think I have seen The Mission 44,000 times. But you walk into a classroom now, they haven't seen it, and it still holds up. It's a very, very strong film. They know Robert De Niro. Jeremy Irons isn't so well. You've got to tell them that that's Liam Neeson, and because they know Taken, some of them do. So The Mission, Shawshank Redemption, particularly in the year of hope. I think yeah, I think Shawshank Redemption is great. Now, many of them would have seen that, or at least it would have been on at home, because God knows it's on Channel 9 every 3 weeks. And so if they haven't seen it, well, that's willful. But if they've mum and dad watch it every 3 weeks. I think Billy Elliot is one of the great films about self-esteem and about being true to your own story, and also the journey of the dad. That like the dad's the very interesting character. Billy's lovely and wonderful, and we love him. We're all cheering for him. But actually, I think dad, every bone in that man's body says no miner's son does ballet, and I think it's a powerful story. Um, I personally think Jesus of Montreal for older students is really good. I don't like organ transplant. Well, I find inadequate organ transplantation at the end as a metaphor for resurrection. But I think they're trying, and they're trying hard. Getting kids to watch a French film with subtitles is not easy, but by God, it's worth it. The Life of Brian, I wouldn't dismiss The Life of Brian. I think it's fantastic. You want to teach New Testament to year 10, 11, and 12, the context of looking for a Messiah, the competing Messiahs in the marketplace. Now, there'll be some saying, well, that's a heretical film. I can remember my Irish Monsignor in Toowoomba when it came out in 1979. He got up in the pulpit and said, anybody who goes to see The Life of Brian is committing a mortal sin. We went that afternoon because the quickest way to get you to, as a Catholic, go and do something is tell us you cannot possibly do it. But The Life of Brian is actually not heretical. There is a character, you can tell I've written about this and I've taught it. I know that film very well. There's a character called Jesus in the film. He's on screen for 1 minute and 43 seconds, and he's never treated disrespectfully, ever. He's never thrown off at. What happens around him, like blessed are the cheesemakers. Like he says, blessed are the peacemakers. But at the back of the crowd, they can't hear. Oh, what do you say? Blessed are the cheesemakers. Well, what's special about the cheesemakers? Well, it's not meant to be taken literally. It refers to any manufacturer of dairy products. This is sort of very interesting in terms of how the New Testament comes to get written, the competing messiahs, why they thought that the Messiah would come at this time. Even though there are some irreverent things in it, I don't want to run away from that. But I do, so I think it's for older students, obviously. A couple of others. And these are sort of classic films that I think we should think about. A Man for All Seasons is still a knockout film from 1968, is it? I think. It'd be a bit tough for kids, I think, but we could do it in blocks. It is really true to the Thomas More story. Robert Bolt wrote the screenplay. He also wrote The Mission, by the way. Many, many years later, he won an Oscar for The Man for All Seasons. And it's really interesting because he went back to the trial. And so there's big slabs of the trial. He didn't need to make up the screenplay to get good drama. Chariots of Fire, I think, is a terribly interesting film about would you sacrifice not running in the Olympics for a gold medal because it's on a Sunday, because it's on the Sabbath? And of course, he's a fundamentalist Christian. He's a We Free, which is a offshoot of the Presbyterians. My final two would be Schindler's List. It's a very hard film to watch, a very gripping film to watch, but that you can do something for someone is already always better than doing nothing for no one. So Schindler eventually just does something for someone. And then, as you may know, they were a lovely accompaniment to that film about mission, identity, our relationship with our Jewish brothers and sisters. We've got to be careful with that, with the whole criticism of Israel right now. We are not anti-Semitic. We love our Jewish brothers. Jesus was Jew, Mary was a Jew, Joseph was a Jew. So we've got to work a bit overtime on that one. And that's not the same, and it's not identical to Israel. So I think there is, in fact, a documentary about Schindler meeting the survivors and the children of the survivors. That's around. Oh no, it's another one. It's another documentary, but it's a similar theme. And then the last one, I think, which is an Australian film, and it's a bit of a boys-owned annual. I'm a bit conscious of my film selection there is a bit male, but is Gallipoli. No greater love than has someone to lay down their life for their friends, and also that the guys at Gallipoli were frightened. They were human beings. They're weeping. They're shaking. All of that scene before the emerging out of the trench. I think it humanises them. It's a David Williamson screenplay, and Peter Weir, of course, directed the film, and it launched the career of Mel Gibson internationally and Mark Lee to a lesser degree. There are loads of others. I wrote a book a number of years ago that some might like called Movies That Matter, Reading Film Through the Lens of Faith. And I take 50 films, some of them are dated now, but 50 films, and then I give you questions at the end. It's Loyola University Press, Loyola Press in Chicago. They took it, but it's available here in Australia, and it'd be available. It'd be $2, I assume, on a remainder table on eBay or Amazon. So you could get it very cheaply. It's about 20 years old now. So there's some of the ones that I would. So I hope they're helpful. The ones that I would really hope most kids wouldn't have seen any of those films, and yet they're pretty timeless. And I'm pretty sure that you have your own list. All of you have your own list of what's worked, and maybe we could share that in the column if you do, because other people would get really good ideas.
I can actually see that starting to happen. So, yeah, please do pop it in the chat and share with you. Sal has said we show the way when
Oh, yeah,
studying
the way's great.
pilgrimage.
The
Yeah,
only thing I
and
don't like about the way sale is, and I won't comment on everyone, but is that is anybody happy who does the Camino? Like I've just done the Camino, by the way, and I loved it, and I met lots of happy people. Like we've got people in grief, a woman who's fleeing domestic violence. We've got the atheist Irish writer who's got writer's block. We've got the Dutch, beautiful Dutch guy, Jos, who his wife would have sex with him because he's too obese. And we've got somebody else. But, I just wanted a happy person to be doing the Camino, I have to say. But it was good for the drama of the film. It was wonderful.
it is indeed. I was just thinking as you were talking too, some of those two things came to mind whenever I say to my friends, "Oh, I teach English and I write and all this sort of thing." Oh, I used to teach English, not anymore. I work here. Is that their favorite book is always a book that they didn't choose themselves, that they learned at high school and did an in-depth study
Mm.
on.
Yeah, true.
And and I mean I'm not young anymore and I'm still being told this, and of all the time they live, that's the book. So for some kids that's the only book they've read, and they won't read another book when they're adults, so this might be the only film study they do. But for other people that's how much an important experience that is. And just the second thing, oh, and when I worked in radio, the idea was, they would always say by the time you're over it, they're just getting used to it, because we used to complain in commercial radio about the repetition. And but the thing is, yes, you've taught it a million times, but when I have that same conversation, people with my friends, they always say, "I love To Kill a Mockingbird." It was really, really good,
Well, I'll give you an example of the Shawshank Redemption. Like, for instance, I've used it again for the Year of Hope. So we're in this Jubilee Year of Hope. I just don't know a film that, and he stands with the cruciform when he comes out of, crawled through a river of shit and came out clean on the other side. Love the idea of redemptio, redemption. The word redemption means to buy back. In Greek and in Latin, to buy back something, buying freedom, and he knows where to find him. Like he goes to the tree of the tree of life, or the tree of suffering. The cross becomes the tree of life. Where is the tin to give the money for Red to get to Mexico? For those of you who haven't seen the Shawshank Redemption, I'm killing it, but that's fine. It's at the bottom of a tree, and where do they meet? On a beach, for God's sake. Well, if that's not John 22, I'll eat my hat. So there's lots of parallels. I'm going to prepare a place for you where I will be, you will be too. And I've written about the Shawshank Redemption. Someone was asking what the name of my book was. I just saw that. It's called Movies That Matter, Reading Film Through the Lens of Faith. And it's Loyola Press, but just put it in and get Australian, and it'll be here in Australia somewhere.
Richard's got some great names for his books too. So while you're having a look, there's they're always they're always well named. The other thing I was just thinking when you were speaking there is you don't need to show a whole film. You know, you just need to pick a meaningful scene and look at that in depth, particularly with your
Yeah,
young
the
students.
rule of thumb is that it should be 15 to 20 minutes. And it's a little bit of what you were saying about radio, actually, Laura. They're just getting into it. Sometimes we think, oh, we don't want to show this too long and they'll get distracted or they'll start talking. Well, actually, at least the research is showing that a really effective clip is one where, in fact, you've got a good 5 or 6 minutes to get into it. And then, so every class is different, and people know their own attention span and the age group and whatever. But that's the rule of thumb from research that the effective film clips are 15 to 20. But I don't think we should be frightened of showing a whole film. And sometimes, if it really matters, like during Holy Week or for the year of Jubilee, we might want to show a year level or a few classes or whatever, trying to reorganize the timetable. I know the other teachers will be up in arms, but I think Catholic schools can try and do this anyway, because it really matters to show the whole class the Shawshank Redemption. That could be an enormously wonderful thing to do in the year of hope. And then unpack it, of course. We just don't show it. It's got to lead somewhere pedagogically.
Can be a reward too, if if you have done an in-depth study of a clip, to then say, well, at the end of the term, we'll watch the whole thing together, and then maybe even apply some of those frameworks that Richard mentioned earlier to the film, and just do it in discussion at the end. So there's lots of amazing things you can do. Oh, I see Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. That's so beautiful.
Oh yeah, all the Tolkien stuff and C.S.
Mhm.
Lewis, they've been all fabulous. And of course, an AI really helps here. Just if ever you want to see the parallels, and I've done this just as an experiment, Christian commentary. What is the Christian commentary on the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? Bingo, up it comes. Give me a summary, 300 words, and all the major themes will be there.
Aslan, God. um, oh, look, the time always goes so fast in these sessions. I will make sure, I know I still owe everyone a set of notes from the last session. We've got some articles as well on this topic, how to use film in the RE classroom. We've got a series of articles on Bluey that Michael McVeigh has written, and there's actually a couple of more of those to come out. And we're also probably going to start some Sneaky Jesus scenes as well. And obviously we will be mining this professional learning session.
And also Australian Catholics has a film review section, and Peter Malone and Peter Sheehan do some really thoughtful reviews there, and sometimes draw your attention to a film that you wouldn't have seen or that would be at the box office. And even I also want to suggest that for the people who are here with us right now, feeding your own soul. Like if you're interested enough to be with us right now, then chances are film feeds your own soul, and that's a good thing. So sometimes it may not be something you can use in the classroom, but by God, it'll really have a wonderful impact on you and try and help you. Yeah. So
If you're on the Education Hub, the reviews are sitting in the family section, and I find them, just personally, I find them really good. I'm a big superhero movie person. Like, I'm happy there. I'm an escapist. I like a bit of fantasy. My husband is not. And when I try to find stuff that we can both watch together, I find those reviews really good. Not just in my teaching. Like, I don't just use them for my teaching. I use them for me as well, to be a bit more thoughtful about what I'm watching, and to find something that pleases everybody or pushes us out of our comfort zone. So they are worth looking out for, particularly if you are a bit bored with your films at school and you want to find some new ones. There was a good one I put in Catholic Teacher about Laudato Si. It's not about Laudato Si, but it's a documentary that's been reviewed about some young people um, um, being proactive in that area, I
if
suppose.
you wanted to show a great animation, and I know some kids, older kids, would find animation to be, it's the number one genre, by the way. Well, no, that's not true. The science fantasy genre is number one. Number two genre at the cinema for the last 20 years has been animation, since Shrek changed the whole game. But Wall-E. which has got a bit of age on it now. But that is a fantastic film on all the things that Francis was going to say later in Laudato Si. And I think it's a very, very effective film and affective film too.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to wrap it up because I know Richard has somewhere else to go, and I'm going to hand over to Michael now, just to finish the section off. But I really want to say thank you so much to Richard for your time. I could have asked you so much more. Hopefully, we can have you back again, and I'll ask you the questions I didn't get to. But thank you so much.
Very well. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Richard, and thank you, Laura, for a very insightful session. Look forward to checking out some of those movies. I've been writing down that list there. I think I've seen most of them, but there's a couple there that I haven't, which is good.